let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, do we need a call to order and a roll call?
Yes, please. Chair Morgan?
Yes, here.
Director Gibbons? Here. Director Smith?
Here.
I'll note Vice Chair Abby Kogan and Director Seeks are absent.
Great. Sorry, I'm just trying to locate my phone, make sure the ringer's off. That's what happens when you race in. You just throw it in your purse as you walk out of the car. There it is. Okay, first item is the consent calendar, or the public comment, I'm sorry. Anybody wishing to make any public comment?
I would just like to say that I really appreciate everything that you have done over the last year, 2 years, to make this, I think, the premier CCE in California. There's been a lot of buzz on the advocacy lists about breaking up PG&E and storming the barricades of Governor Newsom's inauguration, and it's so nice to be here where work gets done, programs get created, energy's delivered at a lower price, and nobody's worried terribly, except for maybe Donna, I heard about going bankrupt. So I just, you've all done a great job, and I hope it will all continue into the new year.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make any public comments? Comment.
And I have other meetings you can come to.
Yeah, right. Okay, consent calendar. We need to approve that minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, regular calendar. Draft decarbonization strategy and programs roadmap.
All right. And Andrea, did you want me to take the mouse?
No, it's up to you if you'd like to control this. And just a note that Girish, our CEO, is joining us via WebEx today, so you'll see him on our screen there.
You can't see us.
Yeah, we can't see
Hi,
us.
everyone.
He can hear though.
Oh. We waved hello.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. First, just how we got here, the progress that we made to date. Second, what needs to happen for SVCE to achieve deep decarbonization, which is the core mission. And third, the proposed decarb strategy and programs roadmap. So we'll jump into the first bullet, how did we get here? So just to remind you all, we've been following this fairly extensive stakeholder process. Should I move here? So you can still see. Okay, we've been following a fairly extensive stakeholder engagement process, but actually, as I think you all know, programs development actually started last calendar year, and there was a little bit of a false start. We went back, formed the CPAC, and have been carrying out a number of different stakeholder engagement meetings. Kind of illustrated in this fishbone diagram, and so we're right before the December board meeting, so on the very edge of the fish. And the main groups, as shown in the diagram, and that you'll know that are providing input, the member agency working group, of course, is a very key group that meets monthly with the city staff. The customer programs advisory group formed by the board, meeting monthly, had key recommendations. Our C&I customers had key recommendations, had unique needs. And then we also had in September the facilitated stakeholder workshop as well. And so that was a much broader effort to seek feedback from really across all of these other stakeholders that are really important for us to develop successful programs that don't fall in those other categories. And then of course SVCE board and staff. It's a key group providing input. And Bruce, I'll recognize Bruce as one of the participants in the stakeholder workshop as well. All right, so this has been taking place for a number of months, but as you all know, the landscape around us has changed. So we've had some recent policy and regulatory decisions, increasing competitive pressure. And so I won't go into those since those are really the focus of other agenda items. But just wanted to certainly acknowledge them and then bring up the point of like what do we think how do we need to move forward with programs? And the consensus certainly is that we must demonstrate our relevance and the CCA model relevance through really well-designed, effective programs, putting money and effort into activities that really matter and can support the mission, and that however we need to choose those activities really with surgical precision, given the resource constraints that exist. And the alternative to that would be inaction, which really is not consistent with our mission. And we think by pursuing really well-informed program design, that will really help demonstrate the CCA model more generally, that showcase its unique strengths in addition to SVCE's unique strengths. A focus on the decarb mission, alignment with our municipalities, motivation to innovate, and ability to be nimble, transparency, accountability, and reinvestment in community. And so what you'll see in the program roadmap, however, is certainly a key theme of leverage. Leveraging our unique position as being made up of member cities and leveraging limited resources. And we expect to achieve that leverage mainly through partnerships, through innovation, and also through data. And so we'll come back to that later. So that's kind of part one, how we got here. Part two, we've also been carrying out a fairly extensive analysis of our emissions trajectory. And so we've been using that to inform the program roadmap. And actually I'd like to acknowledge Robert Sprague, who's here in the audience. And so when I say we, I'm referring to Robert. So he's a master's student at Stanford that's been working with us in his limited free time. I don't know how you're able to manage everything, but we're very happy, very lucky to have him here working with us on some modeling work. And he'll be continuing working with us actually in the new year as well on some projects. Yeah. Okay, so the next few slides really illustrate some of the outcomes from that modeling work that kind of demonstrate what needs to happen to achieve SVCE missions. So the first one shows our emissions trajectory. There was a version of this that was shown in the September board meeting, so this is updated from that. And you'll notice, I'll highlight a few things. So on the, oops, sorry about that. Actually, could I use this one instead? I'll just press the space bar. Okay. I hope no one has epilepsy. All right, so on the vertical axis, we have our annual emissions. So 2015 on the very left, so that's pre-SVCE, that's our baseline year. 2017 is our first full year of emissions, first full year of operations and the emissions resulting from that. And Don Gray gave an extensive presentation on that in July, which you may remember. And so that's the same data that you have seen in the past. To the right of the dotted line is a baseline forecast for what we think emissions will look like in our service territory going forward. And just as a reminder, although of course we're an electricity provider, we're defining our emissions, in this case, as all energy-related emissions. So it includes electricity, which are shown in green shades. It includes natural gas, shown in golden shades, and then transportation in blue. And so that dotted line there is what we think is a fairly realistic expectation of what emissions will happen without any intervention from us, besides our supply portfolio. So this, of course, takes into account the supply portfolio, but not any programs. What you'll also notice is kind of a cone of uncertainty. And so the darker color is, so the darker color is what we think is a medium confidence, and the lighter shade is kind of a higher confidence interval. So the main takeaway is it's a big error bar. This is kind of a de facto model of the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty. That's the result of a scenario analysis.
Excuse me. So the lightest blue is what? I can't quite read those.
Sorry.
Transportation.
Over here.
Non-commercial.
Maybe I'll put him down here.
We're the
logo
of an acquirer.
We're moving you on the screen here.
So, commercial
That's
transportation,
Okay, stop moving me.
Hey, it looks like his hair is red.
Now you have a
My
halo.
red
Yeah.
halo.
Yeah. Very, very good.
So, transportation, commercial being trucks types of things. Transportation off-road being recreational kinds of things.
I think it also includes
Planes,
trains.
trains.
All that,
Yeah.
okay. And then transportation, non-commercial, which is vehicle, just particularly a passenger vehicle.
That's right.
Got it, okay, thank you.
What's the yellow, diamond on 2021? What's that diamond represent?
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning that. So this is, SVCE has an emissions target already. And so this is the 2021 emissions target. And so that was set a number, I guess, a year or two ago. I'm actually not positive exactly when it was set, but it's to reduce emissions from 30% below the 2015 baseline levels by 2021.
And that's that number, that's where we need to be.
That's where we need to be.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So, from this graph, we won't get there without intervention is basically what we're saying. Another thing to note, the dotted line on the bottom, so that's the California statewide goal for 2050 scaled to our service territory.
That's the new one, they changed it.
So this is the 80% below 1990. Yes, you're right, it's not the executive order, it's the 20,
I'm just trying to extrapolate out, but how close do we get to that dotted line if you added the extra 20 years onto this graph?
yes. So we have that as well.
Oh, good.
It's in a couple slides.
Oh, see, I'm just
Okay.
jumping.
Yeah, you're really on top of everything.
Okay, I'll shut up.
So I have a couple more slides that I'll go through first, but then we will
Okay.
get to that. So the next slide is showing the BAU forecast, and all of the stacked bars, this is the same data, but what you'll notice is that cone has shifted downwards, and then we have a new dashed green line. And so this is what we think our emissions trajectory would be with the proposed portfolio of programs that we'll talk about later in the presentation. And so this is the type of impact that we think we can have at this point in time. Again, very large error bar there as well. But using that analysis and that functionality that's built into the model, that's how we informed a couple of potential proposals for emissions targets for 2025 and 2030. So if you recall in the last strategic plan update, which it was earlier this year, that was a TBD that we were looking into longer term emissions reductions targets post 2021. And so here's what we think could be two reasonable ones: 40% below the 2015 levels by 2025, 50% below by 2030. But to get to your question, what does that look like longer term? And so this is showing, again, the same data for 2015 and 2017. We removed the stacked bars here, but you still have, this is the business as usual prior to any program intervention. Here are the goals that we had formulated and proposed, but here's where we need to be. And so, we still, even if we were to set these targets and achieve these targets, the amount of emissions reductions required is still substantial. It's unprecedented levels of shifting away from natural gas to electricity in buildings, in addition to assuming very minimal transportation emissions. Yeah.
No big deal. No biggie.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. So just to kind of recap the emissions analysis and goals, we have this existing goal. As Dr. Corrigan pointed out, we've formulated what we think could be a couple longer-term goals for 2025 and 2030, and that was informed using this analysis. So that's what it would take, or just from that analysis, hopefully you can kind of see the level of change that would be required for us to achieve deep decarbonization. And so with that, I'd like to go on just to the final part, which is the proposed decarb strategy and programs roadmap. All right, so there are a few different parts to this. The first that I wanted to share, this is the same as what you saw in September. I realize that was a long time ago. But this was a strategic framework that was developed as a result of the stakeholder process that helped us inform and guide selection of what sort of activities SVC should be doing. So for instance, on the top, what are the sorts of activities? Retail products and services, including our own retail products, retail rates in this case, but also helping to promote other products and services to achieve decarbonization. Education and outreach is a key area of activity, public policy and market transformation. We've kind of crystallized on these 5 priorities or evaluation criteria: customer and community value, emissions impact. We want to pursue things scalable and transferable so that they will have an impact not just on SVCE service territory, but even beyond. Equity in service is another metric, and things that are a core role for SVCE. And then the other part is kind of how will we do it, how will we leverage, and this is what you've already seen before, which is to focus on innovation, data, and partnerships. And this was also the same from the September meeting, if you happen to remember it. This is the overarching strategy to decarbonize, and this isn't unique to SVCE. It's a result of a large body of academic research. You decarbonize the electricity supply, electrify everything, and make sure you're doing that in a way where you're harnessing energy efficiency and being cognizant of the grid and supporting grid innovation. And so that's kind of the overarching strategy. So in the next slide, so we have a number of SVC specific strategies and implementation steps. And so the draft decarb strategy and programs roadmap contains several of these specific strategies. I didn't quite have a version ready for this meeting, but I brought a printout draft copy, which you can see. It contains the goals, strategic framework, which we already covered, the overarching strategy, but the part that I'm referring to here is more this implementation plan, which has a couple pages of specific strategies and implementation steps. So I can't share copies, but it's going to change a little bit because we're still revising it for the Friday meeting. But as an example, one strategy is to educate and engage customers in our community in understanding their energy usage and the benefits of building vehicle electrification. An implementation step to that is a program that you're already familiar with, the Customer Resource Center, which is something that's come up in prior meetings and we already have budget for. Another strategy example, form and leverage strategic partnerships to engage the innovation ecosystem and provide a voice for our mission. And so a specific implementation step is entering into MOUs with those core strategic partners. So I wanted to jump into specifically the programs roadmap component, which I'll divide into kind of sector-specific programs and then cross-sector programs. So the first one is power supply, and the bolded activities are activities that are near-term priorities. And so these are activities where we're requesting budget and in some cases contract review and approval by the board in the meeting next week. And so for C&I clean power offerings, this is one that will be discussed more, I'm sure, later in the meeting. But being responsive to our large C&I customers, developing products and services that really meet their unique needs for customer retention, and also potentially actually attracting customers who have already bought. And there are other activities, but in the interest of time, I'll just focus on the near-term ones that are bolded. So that's power supply. For the built environment, the first one listed is REACH codes, and of course this was a topic at the meeting, at the last board meeting. And so we're wanting to support our member agencies and the exploration of REACH codes. And that one is more of a time-sensitive one relative to kind of some of the other activities that we're doing, given the overarching timeline of the building code change. But in addition to that, other near-term priorities include all-electric showcase grants, which is again focused on new construction. The first two are mainly focused on new construction. And the general idea is that you develop the market capacity, like the contractor networks, et cetera, in a new construction kind of environment, and then build on retrofits from that. But we have already started retrofit activities with our Air District grant for the heat pump water heater switch outs. So one key partner for the built environment that I wanted to mention particularly because of Director Gibbons' comments in the last meeting, is you pointed out there are a number of different stakeholders, and how are we engaging those stakeholders, not just in the development of building codes, but other incentives, policies, and programs. And there is a key partner that we're engaged with. That's a Building Decarbonization Coalition. And it is a coalition, it's not an advocacy group, it's a coalition that incorporates all of those industry stakeholders, labor, architects, developers, other utilities, CCAs. Actually, there are 2 CCA members, and then Cal CCA is also a member. But it also includes some of the usual suspects, the environmental advocacy organizations as well. But it's through this coalition which we're going to be leveraging to help interface with those groups and kind of catalyze the market forward. And those activities will support any program activity related to building electrification.
Can I, am I allowed to ask a question at this point, or do you want it at the end?
Fine by me.
So what I'm wondering is what the trade unions think about electrification. I mean, on the one hand, it diminishes the need for gas plumbing in new construction. On the other hand, there's new things that get installed, more infrastructure, different infrastructure, and different infrastructure for HVAC, etc. And I'm wondering if there's enough of an experience base to have labor be supportive of this effort, as opposed to, oh my God, you're taking away my gas plumbing job.
The minute she said they were involved, I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. It's going to be strange bedfellows if they're opposing us in half the conversations and in bed with us in half the others. So it is an interesting. Yeah.
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
This is one of the reasons I am in Sacramento today. I'm going to be meeting with someone who's very involved with labor on the trade side, not IBW, but basically has connections to plumbers union. So I'll be actually meeting with them as soon as this meeting's over. Additionally,
What else you need, Rod?
I'm glad to our CEO who just anticipates. Thank you.
welcome.
Sounds like you're gonna go figure it out. Thank you.
All right, so for the third sector mobility, the primary activity, which is very near term Q1 of the coming calendar year, is the EV charging infrastructure strategy and plan. And this is very much in response to our member agencies. There are existing plans out there, there are existing tools out there, there's also grant funding from the Air District and other entities. And so this is going to be an extremely action-oriented plan that is basically going to feed into a lot of the activities happening kind of later in the slide. So some of the aspects that will be addressed in that strategy and plan certainly include permitting practices and other things that our member agencies have some control over. They're interested in seeing what they can do there. Ordinance and reach code integration is another component, but siting, rate design, in addition to the funding that exists and how SVCE can help facilitate us going out and getting additional resources. And one of, we anticipate that the programs that we're going to be starting is the EV fast charging pilot depots. And so we're working with private sector, member agencies, regional partners to develop one or more pilots specifically focused on fast charging.
Is that just so I understand who we're talking about? We're talking about the guys in your town, ChargePoint, Tesla,
EVgo.
EVgo. Okay, good.
And we've already had a number of conversations informing kind of our activities related to this one, including the ride-hailing companies. So that's another key stakeholder.
The scooters.
Who is playing today in EV fast chargers?
Probably the biggest one is EVgo. So that's a Santa Monica-based company, but if you go to Whole Foods, it's typically EVgo chargers, and they're typically packed backlog, and they basically can't build out enough as, they can only build them as fast as permitting
So
will
these
allow.
are like level 3 chargers, things that go faster than the typical charge
Yes.
points.
Yeah, so 30 minutes, typically you're on your way, which is appropriate if you're grocery shopping.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think the charge point was actually building a factory in Campbell. I don't know if they went forward with that, but they were talking about it.
Yeah, I think, this is certainly the direction the industry is shifting. I mean, if you look at level 2 charging availability, there's actually a decent amount of availability, but unless you want to wait 6-7 hours, you're probably not going to
Go to
be
charge
pursuing-
point, they have 40 stations
Yeah.
in their parking lot.
And so people are looking for, especially those living in multifamily homes, this is how they could potentially adopt an EV if they can install it on their own.
Well, I'm sure you already know this, but at NVIDIA, they have charging stations. They have valet service to charge your car.
Oh, that's awesome.
Meaning
Yes,
people,
they do.
Meaning the minute
Pull
yours
them
is
in and out
finished,
of
they
the
pull on
chargers,
the
yeah.
next one.
Experience speaketh.
Hey, I have hydrogen, 5 minutes.
Alright, so for energy efficiency and grid integration, so the main focus of this, sorry, the main focus of this particular sector, if you want to call it that we're focused on is virtual power plants. And so through our electrification activities, we're going to be adding significant load. And if that's not done in a way that's really integrated into the grid, there could be problems, it could be more expensive, but then also those are resources that can provide value. And SVCE is an entity that could actually help monetize that value. And so there are different ways to go about doing it. One could be a resource adequacy procurement, although there's a whole proceeding associated with that and changes being made. And so if it's not through that mechanism, there can be other mechanisms where we can help provide that additional value to the to electrified loads, which will in turn spur additional EV and building electrification technology adoption. So it's a pretty key activity, but also one that's very dependent upon what happens at the CPUC and what happens, in places in Sacramento.
so today, we don't have the right to organize a virtual power plant, but we could if the CPUC would let us.
So we could, so we probably wouldn't. So let me clarify. So the way that this program is potentially going to be organized, it's a little bit of an arm's length. And so what has happened historically, the investor-owned utilities have solicited capacity bids from these virtual power plants, and then these virtual power plants are bidding into CASO, so they're bidding into the wholesale markets. And so in that case, they're doing those activities to demonstrate that they're providing capacity, and the IOUs are paying a premium for it. And so that's one mechanism. We could also we're having conversations with them now, with many of these so-called technology aggregators that have smart infrastructure that are bidding into markets to really determine how we can best kind of support them. And because if it's not through a capacity procurement mechanism, there could be other ways. So that's kind of a long answer.
So if we came up with brilliant technology to store electricity, and there was an overabundance of solar, and we have the means through regulation or whatever to be able to effectively allow those people to put that power on, and we take it off and we store it for later.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example of something that we might be able to do.
Yeah.
So if I may, I'm still not clear on what virtual power plant is.
Okay. So thank you for asking that, because I realized I did not describe it. and so imagine you have multiple charging stations, EV charging stations at NVIDIA, Google, all the tech companies across the service territory. Charging stations nowadays typically can communicate you can actually control them remotely, and so-called technology aggregators, which are typically the charge points of the world, they can actually ramp up and down charging levels of multiple different charging stations. And so it's kind of a cloud-based power plant. So
It's like
basically,
the scooters when they control the geography and speed at which those things go, but okay.
yeah, and so they can control an entire fleet of resources. And
What
ramp it
good
up
does
to
that do us? I don't understand what value it brings to us. It doesn't provide us with any additional energy.
So it actually bids into the markets as supply. And so if you,
How does
They're
the
buying.
charge point supply?
so the main actor for EV chargers is eMotorworks, not sure if you're familiar with them, but it's basically chargers that, they really focus specifically on grid integration of their chargers. They bid into the markets by, if they reduce all of the charging load by a certain amount, that's effectively equivalent of a power plant, ramping up that load.
And they do that by data determining when and where people charge?
Exactly. So they have extremely sophisticated analytics about projecting when people are going to be plugged in, when they'll leave their car. There are people that can opt out of it. They're also at the same time forecasting market prices to determine when it's favorable for them to actually bid into the markets. And so
And
it's
when you say bid into the market, they are bidding in to reduce their demand or selling excess demand?
so in that case they're more of a supply. And so they're operating like a power plant.
Because they bought all this power and they have excess and they're putting it back into the grid?
So they haven't bought the power. In this case, it's all behind the retail meter. But if you look at kind of what the impact is of taking multiple different charging stations and just reducing the load,
Taking them offline, yeah.
it acts as power supply. And so it's kind of it's an emerging way for distributed energy resources.
That's
to
gonna
participate.
need a lot more explanation. I mean, I
Yeah.
do basically get what you're saying, but I'm not sure I understand. I mean, it's sort of the reverse of being taught not to do your laundry and dishwashing in the middle of the day. You're always supposed to do it at night, and now we're gonna be changing the habits. But,
Plus they can incentivize, right? If they see this is the peak, but that's when it costs the
I'm trying to
most
think of a
to
good
buy the
example.
power.
I know there's
They
a
wanna
good example.
incentivize you to come charge here because they can buy their power cheapest then. So they wanna control that whole flow of
I
cost.
think one way to
We
think
need a
about
better
this.
example. We need an actual example that people can identify with to help explain that. It could be anything but something.
Sure.
So if you've heard the term megawatts,
Yep.
so it's the opposite of a megawatt. So if the grid needs more power, you can fire up a power plant and you can put more megawatts on the grid. Or you can talk to a bunch of customers that are currently placing demands on the grid and convince them to lower their demand,
Right.
which is effectively the same thing as
Yes.
putting another megawatt on. So
So
think
we
of it.
already do that.
Well, that's what these programs are.
Okay,
that
but we
they-
already do that in a different way, which
Yeah.
has a negative connotation. It's to prevent brownouts. People who have agreed to turn off all their lights and do this and
That's
that.
a negative, yes.
Yes, so there are kind of reliability-based events
Yeah.
and other events that are just more risk,
Is it,
So-
increasing
It's
demand side
it's
flexibility.
fascinating because
Demand side
of what's changing
I know.
and we all have to remember, we're talking about here.
crosses over our hedging strategies and risk committee, I think. A little bit, it's that same concept of sort of figuring out where your load is and
Sorry, keep going.
So, I do sort of get it, but I think some memos in advance of the meetings, if you're gonna explain some of this, might help minimize some questions in the meeting, maybe.
And for me, if you say demand side management, I immediately get that.
Yeah.
If that's what one of the vehicles is here.
Yeah, so demand side management is, there are different definitions for it, and so it does, often include energy efficiency in addition to controllable loads. And so if that's a better terminology to use, we can do that. All right, so I'll go ahead and move forward. Thanks for that feedback. So the next area is cross-sector, which is education and outreach. and these are two that you've already seen in the past, specifically the Customer Resource Center, developing a Customer Resource Center to enable engagement and awareness. And so that's been certainly the discussion of multiple CPAG meetings, and we do already have some budget that we had gotten approval for to start that out in the latest budget cycle. And then also the community engagement grants, which are already launched. And so we're kind of including that in the package of the first tranche of programs for completeness. All right, so the next one is focused on innovation, and this is the last group of programs.
You got 2 number 5s, by the way.
Oops, sorry about that. Thank you.
Just for your slide.
Thank you very much. All right, so this one's focused on innovation, and it's an area
we're talking about.
So it's an area that is certainly extremely important for our community, and it's one that we think is a key leverage point. And so in order to going back to the longer term vision of what it takes to achieve deep decarbonization, that's a really drastic transition that's going to require a lot more innovation. And so we think we're in a really unique position given where we are in Silicon Valley to really help try to accelerate specifically the innovations that will help decarbonize buildings and transportation. So the 2 areas, one is innovation partners, engaged with key strategic partners, and so we have 2 different MOUs, which will be attachments to the staff report, one with Prospect Silicon Valley and Joint Venture Silicon Valley, so key players in the innovation ecosystem to help us more efficiently engage with startups and corporates, designing new products and services. And then the second one is more focused on allocating a certain amount of budget, getting together standardized agreements, and then having a transparent evaluation criteria and process for running pilot projects. And so this would be an entry point for external partners. So we already get a lot of solicitations to partner, and many of the types of activities that are proposed look extremely interesting and relevant, and they are more focused on kind of emerging technologies often. And so this is really just providing that infrastructure that would allow us to really nimbly engage with different entities. And so this would include private sector, not just private sector, but also academics, also other public sector entities as well. And so we're calling that innovation on-ramp, but it's basically a pilot program vehicle. And so the 2 key partners for innovation that we currently have MOUs with, or that you'll see, Prospect and Joint Venture, but there are other organizations that we've identified that we think are really key strategic partners that we're in the process of still developing MOUs with. Okay, so I realize I'm taking up a lot of time. So here is everything that I showed you in the prior few charts, but on a single chart, just to give you an idea of kind of what it looks like relative to our Venn diagram. And so I'll move on to some key analyses. And so those were more programmatic initiatives, but in addition to programs, there are other things that maybe don't quite shouldn't describe necessarily as a program or wouldn't, but they're really key activities that we need to carry out in order to inform program design, development, implementation. So one of them is one we've already completed, the heat pump technology, economics, and policy assessment, and this was in part catalyzed by a Sunnyvale study session that was carried out by SVCE, or the component that was carried out by SVCE since it's relevant for all of the service territory. And so we have the results from that study informing all of our building electrification work. We're carrying out a customer segmentation to really get a better understanding of our customer base, which can be used for targeted marketing, outreach, and precision program design. We have in mind doing a distributed energy resource potential assessment, and that sort of assessment is focused on taking the results from like the DMV-GL clean asset baseline and looking to see going forward, what do we think the adoption rate of solar is going to be in 10 years? What do we think EV adoption is going to be and other technologies. And so that will help feed into load forecasting. It's typically that type of potential assessment would feed into a load forecast and also certainly feed into program design as well. It's just getting a greater level of visibility into what's happening in our service territory.
I don't know if this is gonna make sense or not to anybody else, but we're talking, it would be nice, you've got some good diagrams and they are very helpful, at least for me. Is there any kind of a diagram you could produce that would just say, these are all the things that we're doing that would reduce carbon? As, you know, some of them would be under the category of reduced demand, some of them are on the category of innovation. I'm not sure if that's relevant, but you've got so many pieces.
Yeah.
The last slide that you did, pulling it all together, I think would be very helpful, and maybe something else similar to that. Just my thought.
Thank you for that feedback, and I think it's something that we feel is also needed. We're still trying to figure it out like what exactly that could look like.
Or which ones would have the largest impact, the most bang for your buck?
I think you could even do that at a later stage. The concept for me right now is trying to grasp what it is we're trying to tackle.
I have a question about the curves at the beginning.
Okay.
They are not decay curves, are they?
I'm sorry, you're referring to,
Yeah, these
When you say, I'm not sure I follow K curves.
decay,
Oh, DK curves.
yeah, they look more,
Deliberate.
You were looking for that
yeah,
instead of this?
Constant percentage.
yeah.
Because usually when you
They
make
look
change,
kind of the
you.
opposite of decay.
Yeah.
So do you know what I'm talking about? That they look close, they don't exactly look like. The thinking among advocates is that the easier wins will be earlier on.
Yeah.
And so the steepness of the curve will be greater near the beginning. And then we'll become more shallow. And and that's not what I'm seeing here.
yeah.
Well, if you go to 2015.
It's going, I think part of the reason why you don't observe that in this particular chart is because we have a fairly built-out service territory. I mean, that type of chart, it depends heavily on whether you're in an area that has a lot of development, like greenfield development. But this is
I think the answer is what Dawn just said. Look at 2015.
It's decarbonizing as a power supply.
Takes a nosedive when you introduce SVCE, and then everything else becomes a lot shallower.
So we already have our decay curves.
We decayed nicely between 2015
April.
and 2018, yes.
April.
I just think that, it may, as a talking point, be something you wanna.
You'd like to see the second derivative positive.
I would, actually.
You can do that.
To speak to the cavity, you see how it is
Yes, it's-
concave down or
Right, it is.
towards 2030. That's because of the accelerating cumulative amount of electric vehicles. But you would see if that same business as usual was stretched out to 2040, that the blue bar would, that decay would decrease. So then it would become, it would look more like that going out to 2040, because you would have saturated all of the cars with EVs. But we haven't changed the natural gas supply in the business as usual. So you would see that just stretched further into the future.
Okay, so the concavity is part of it regardless because of the EVs.
Right, it's a bottom-up model, and you could think of each sector as fairly independent. I mean, they're all making some assumptions about, growth.
So we're not in control of it.
There's a lot that we're not in control of, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Could I add something here? Amy, would you move to the next slide? The 2050 slide, move
Oh,
one
sorry.
more. So when we were looking at this, we just did a back of the envelope analysis of what it's going to take to get to 2050 from 2030. And if you look at that yellow bar that's above the dotted line in 2018, and if you want to reduce that to the dotted line by 2050, we're going to have something like 25 to 50 homes per day, which will have to be decarbonized every day for the next 20 years, starting in 2030.
Wow.
So it gets to Nancy's point of we are now heading towards the difficult stuff. The easy stuff happened between 2015 and 18. So that's the decay curve. And this is where things like rebates, just like the Sunnyvale City Council, rebates are just going to go that far. This total transformation, that's where building codes, mandates, and some transformative effects have to happen. And much of this we don't know yet. But it's going to be, that's why we talk about unprecedented shift. And what it's going to take is, you've never seen anything like this. And that's the reason why those green dots that we had for 2025 and 2030 is a TBD as to what those targets are going to be. I mean, those are aspirational. Of course, we want to get there. But it's going to take a very different kind of thinking to get there. And SVCE has a role in many of these things, right? Especially when it comes to buildings. We can support in many areas. Cities would have to take a much stronger role there.
Yeah, I'll state again, I think if we switched from natural gas to hydrogen and then used, hydrogen production as a battery, I think storage, that would be faster than this. So, just saying.
Yeah, I think those ideas are being discussed. Actually, just earlier today, I was talking to someone about, I think Southern California Gas has really come up with a strategic plan about using hydrogen in their existing infrastructure. So
Yeah, okay.
those are TBD, and while we're looking at that, we have these priorities for 2019.
Yeah, just to end my comments is that I think that, that James specifically will be asking about the decay curve. And in case others that he's talked to are gonna be watching this, then maybe just an explanation of that we already enjoyed this steep decline. And why it's concave. I mean, I don't know that you need to put it in it, it's good to have a case of it.
Just have that.
I have a comment.
Yep.
A lot of the technology is still expensive. It's a low quantity production. I mean, the hope would be if we help accelerate adoption of these new technologies. We can't expect in the early years that we're going to see a lot of adoption, but if on major building projects in Silicon Valley, we can convince electrification over gas, that would have a big impact, and it would go to building, a lot of things differently. Because we are in a building boom, right?
Yes, that's my point, yeah.
And then secondly, for homeowners, right, rebates and all, and getting people to actually move, very difficult work. But at some point, on an adoption curve, the technology gets proven enough and sound enough that when your water heater fails and your roof goes and the blah, 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 right? Suddenly it becomes the thing to do to make a shift. And I would hope that at least some of this convexity, as opposed to concavity, represents technology, rather standard technology adoption curve. But I get that, if we're trying to get to a big goal, starting in I'll use the term lane way, it doesn't look promising. I mean, but I do think a lot of what we're dealing with is, at the end of the day, consumer demand for vehicles, right? It's, if you looked in this county right now and you looked at the number of cars that have no battery in them, that are internal combustion engine batteries, I'll bet it's the predominant number of cars. And we're gonna have to have a change of heart and on which vehicles we buy. And we're gonna have to have a change of heart about, yeah, as cities, what we require of folks that wanna pull building permits.
I thought you were gonna say
Including the big ones, right? The big multifamily ones.
30 years is a long time. And the innovation that could take place between now and then could have significant,
Yeah.
a significant change. When you just think of what 30 years ago we looked like,
Right.
and the thought of having an electric car to start with would have been sort of a foreign concept, so.
The question is, what role can we play in
Yeah.
accelerating this, right? And helping
helping.
it happen faster.
Yep.
So, if I may add to that, that gets to the, I would say, the key thing in our presentation is we're looking at innovation, partnership, and data. That's what we can bring to the table, because we admit we don't know exactly how this is going to work out. But if we invest in innovation and partnerships, let's get the market to try out different ways to move up that beginning part of that technology adoption curve. And I think from a board perspective, we want to talk about, there may be many failures in these experiments. So when we talk about the innovation on-ramp and the innovation partnership, it's tapping into that wider ecosystem that's present in Silicon Valley. And we are going to have failures, and part of what we're going to talk about is how can we publicize that actually, so we can learn from our mistakes, not just for the Silicon Valley area, but other areas too. And this 30-year period, Courtney, you're exactly right. We don't know how it's going to unfold, but I think investing in the innovation sector, I think gives us, we can try to leverage moving the needle the most with the limited money and staff we have.
I have one final comment. I appreciate the work that's gone into making the model. And what's your name again?
Robert.
Robert. I'm glad that you're able to speak to what your assumptions were, and that's really helpful. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
I concur totally. Is there, so what we're seeing in these diagrams is, I'm going to say the production of greenhouse gas.
And cumulative, total emissions each year.
Total emissions, okay. So we had a slide a while ago now on where the sectors, I mean, we had housing with some, cars were some, and there was, I thought it was a very nice, it was showing us how we got, I think, down to the, where we are now from 15 to 2018. And you had different, similar colors for different use groups. So, I think we're all talking about how to I hate the phrase social engineer, but we have to have an attitude change. And we have to have a value proposition. I think that's Daresh's favorite phrase. We have to help people understand the value of what they're doing versus the cost. They have to be willing to potentially spend more money to meet the higher value of decarbonization.
Yeah.
Okay, so that has a lot to do with cars, which is easy to identify. We're all kind of into that now. It's not so easy to identify with buildings, and you're talking about your all-electric buildings.
Your office.
And in an area which costs a lot of money, electrification of these is costing more. So one of the things that we have to understand in the way of innovation is what can we do to reduce the cost of things that impact housing, construction costs, use of electricity, because we are in a boom, whether it's housing or commercial, whatever. Certainly our high-tech industries use humongous amounts of power, and we're great because we're carbon-free power, but what we want to do is reduce their consumption of power, okay? And so I'm just trying to say, is there, it's probably coming back to what I said earlier, is there some way, that diagram, those bars made a lot of sense to me at the time. And I'm just trying to figure out if there's some way we can talk about this decarbonization in terms of the things that people sort of understand, you know, in the way of housing and commercial, and it had a nice diagram, or a bar there about electric cars versus cars. You know, you could barely see the color line of electric cars even here. So I'm just thinking of how to help communicate to the public what it is that we're trying to do. And I also think the other diagram, which is the one with that one, that diagram is much more encouraging than the others. The others are good for analysis and help perhaps the board members understand. But this is what we want to get to. The message is down there at 2050. Okay? And we have to help people now understand that's what we've got to do. And that the magnitude of what that is has to be communicated.
I think we're talking about a couple of different things here though, because what you're describing in the initial part of your comments sounds more like this resource center that we would like to develop or have available to the consumers.
Not really.
But what I think Garish is talking about is, I'll give you an alternative example. When my sister-in-law, who had Down syndrome, was in her 30s, there wasn't a lot of research being done on Down syndrome as a genetic marker because it was not sexy. And so what we're talking about is how do you drive innovation and prizes and notoriety around successfully researching and developing new programs that then address for the consumer all of the other construction costs and opportunities to implement new programs or new devices, new electric cars, new electric.
And for me, that's not the consumer thing at all.
Right, so
I'm talking the big picture stuff like you are. I was not talking the consumer. I'm talking about the innovation.
So if I may, would I understand the takeaway from Liz's comments? You're looking for two things. One is you would like to see an overview, preferably on one page, of a list of all the programs that we have listed, and some way of showing it in a way saying, all right, these programs contribute to, say, clean power supply, these contribute to transportation, this contributes to building. So you see the whole picture on one page, essentially. So that's something you're helping us out with both communication for next week.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
And then the second takeaway I get is from the slide that's in front of us, which is to figure out a way to communicate the magnitude of this challenge.
Yes.
When it comes to say, okay, what does this mean in terms of the number of electric vehicles, number of vehicles that are running on fossil fuels right now that would have to be transformed.
Right.
So kind of make it a little more real
Well,
in terms of
20 houses a day going to solar, that's pretty real.
that's exact. So we actually talking about that as to how we can do it. I think we can have something in place for the board meeting on both those.
Thanks, those are my points, thanks.
And I mean, to your point, simplifying a message like that, I think is great. If you say it's gonna take X houses, if we were just on a linear ramp, it's gonna take this many houses per year on average to get to that goal. If you said compared to the number of cars we're selling, new cars that are being purchased in Silicon Valley today, you know, it's gonna take a replacement of that stock at a rate of so many cars
Right.
per year.
Exactly.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So today,
Yep.
5% of what we buy are EVs, and it's gonna have to be, you know, that,
40%.
yeah, I mean, something that boils it down, even if it's just strictly linear or average, right?
Right.
Actually
Right.
induces thought in a simple way.
Because I'm finding these diagrams rather initiating. I'm like, ay.
Well, you get, I mean, I come in late to the meeting, excuse me for that, and I get absorbed and try to understand it all, right? And you recognize that a very simple way of thinking about it is, this is what's gonna have to change, this is the change we're gonna have every day for the rest of our lives, plus. And
Yeah, that's very.
that kind of message is actually very powerful. And here's what's happening today. We're building all this new housing stock, and here's where we're at. And this is the change that's going to have to take place. Yeah. Or office stock, whatever it is.
I have another question, about the charts. Okay, so you have black as SVCE, and I don't see any black. Dirt.
Yeah.
Actually,
The dark
Well, no,
green.
it's actually really dark green, and it's not visible because we have such a low emissions rate. It's basically,
oh,
you can
At the
see
bottom.
it, yeah, you
2024.
basically can't see it because we're effectively GHG free. I think it's a quarter, for last year was a quarter pound per megawatt hour, which is very low.
It's like one pixel.
Does it show up in 2024 for some reason though?
It doesn't look like it's visible there, but in that case, maybe we should just eliminate that.
I'm thinking, I'm just saying, or put a footnote, yeah, take it out and put it, because it looks more.
I just read that.
I'll add a footnote.
Burns and biomass that year.
I'll also work with Robert.
That's a good point.
I can also work with Robert to maybe try to simplify some things as well.
right there.
Just,
The red halo.
I know, people always say that's a Grisha's picture for his
It's like from the
annual
lights.
report.
I know.
Those lights keep.
Where
Looking
are you,
off the
Garish?
side.
In the hotel.
The hotel?
You could be on a
No,
medal.
I'm in a lawyer's office, just taking up one of the rooms of one of the employees. She's not here today, so
Nice.
this is where I'm having my meetings today.
We like your halo.
Yeah, I just,
We need to take a picture so you can see what we're looking at.
yeah, we will, I think
Okay, so there are just a few additional.
Tell him to look over his left shoulder.
Yeah, I like the way you look at.
We need you to look over your left shoulder.
That's better.
Yeah. That's a cover
That's
letter.
it, that's it.
Annual report.
With a big title, Vision.
It's good.
Wish that could-
All right, what else we got?
Okay, so there are a few more slides, just, noting that in addition to SVCE resources, specifically percentage of operating revenues, there are a lot of other opportunities to help fund some of the activities that we're talking about. DOE, Air District, of course, CC foundations, et cetera. And so we're looking into all of those opportunities as well. Regarding reporting and review, as a part of the kind of policy doc, the strategy and roadmap, we wanted to include some proposal for how often we bring it back to you all for a comprehensive review, and also like what frequency of reporting makes sense. And so the proposal is to have progress reports kind of integrated into some of these existing cycles. So one of them, for instance, could be Earth Day, which is often a very popular day to talk about emissions reductions, and so that could be a very natural point to have a report to the board. In June is when, at least Last year, we had the strategic plan update, so whenever we are updating the strategic plan, that could be another very natural point to provide an update on kind of progress for the roadmap. And then September with the budget cycle, but then also bring back the entire thing to you for a dedicated discussion. And we're thinking on an annual basis. So for the board meeting next week, I just wanted to go through a couple slides on what you'll see to get your feedback on that. And so we had, in addition to having standard staff report, there are a number of different attachments to that we'd be asking for your approval. One being the actual kind of policy doc, like a 7-page policy doc that describes what I have gone through, the CURB strategy and the programs roadmap. For each individual program that's a 2019 priority, so the ones that were bolded, we've also created 3-page program briefs that provide more information. So a more summary description of what we have in mind for that, what are the key challenges that this program is addressing, what are the goals for it, and then also the approach. And so for each one, we'd have around 3-page, what we're calling program briefs, as an attachment to the staff report. And then there are also some other docs that support some of the programs. And so one of them, we do have drafted a cost-sharing agreement with Peninsula Clean Energy specifically for a technical consultant for the REACH code work. And so you'll see that contract as an attachment. There are 2 different standardized agreements for innovation-focused pilots that would be a part of the innovation on-ramp. One of them is more for hardware pilots, the other one would be more of a non-hardware pilot. And so those standardized agreements would be a part of that program. And then, if people apply for it and they're selected, then we'd be able to very easily execute that. So they're very similar to the other, the existing agreements we have, just some of the language is changed to reflect it's associated with the program. Yeah. And then we have 2 MOUs as well that I mentioned with Prospect and then also joint venture.
I assume the reports will also have some sort of estimate of bang for your buck, or what you would get out of, what we would expect to receive as a result of implementing that program.
So at this point in time, we were thinking of more of a portfolio approach, or at least the slides that I shared before that showed the green dotted line, that's taking into account kind of the whole package. We can certainly provide more granularity into that. I mean, some of them it's harder to relate direct emissions impact because some of it's very indirect, like anything related to education and outreach.
Sure.
And so if you're wanting kind of program specific or specifically kind of sector specific, we can provide some more detail on that, or even some overarching numbers, like based on this proposed budget and based on our modeling, this is kind of the effective abatement costs that we think that we'd be able to achieve.
Yeah, I'm thinking more general,
Okay.
like the kind of why we think this is a good idea, why what we hope to, what outcomes we would appreciate as a result of implementation.
Could I just add something to that, to what Courtney said? I think it's an important point you bring up. In some ways, we're not restricted to the same evaluation test that the PUC imposes on the investor-owned utilities to spend their public benefits money. And since they put that together 20 years ago, it's just become a morass. And they optimize under some very, very inefficient rules. So I'm just kind of repeating what he was saying, which is like, we'll step back a little bit, because things like, for example, if you're investing in innovation, you're not going to get some of those bottom line results within a year or two. It's basically trying to move the needle in some way. So we'll put together some outcomes and why we chose these over some others.
Perfect.
But it's going to be pretty high level.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. I counted 11 programs in the first tranche. That's awesome. I learned a new word today. So yeah, there are 11, so that's 33 pages, roughly.
Yeah. It's gonna be a heavy item. So, I mean, that part of the, would
Next
be,
week.
Yeah, that is a lot. Well, that's gonna be like a 300-page staff report.
I think one thing that would certainly be valuable would be to, because there's also, what I'm showing here is, we haven't even gotten to kind of what the actual budget request is. I mean, I've described kind of what the programs are, but this is kind of a table of the budget request, and then more detail about that is included in the program briefs and would be included in the staff report. So I think we, we certainly recognize it's a lot of material, and if you have any suggestions on, additional suggestions, you've already had a lot, but additional suggestions on how to make this amount of material more manageable, and if there are things that we should cut from the presentation, just in the interest of time, we welcome any feedback you have related to that as well.
I think that I think it's important to go through this because this is pretty key to our strategy of, what is it, showing our elements. So I wouldn't necessarily skip on it, I think it's important.
I would agree with that. It explains where we are, but I think at the end you can say we're going to be simplifying it or doing this and that, but this is done specifically to take the board. Because more than ever, we have to be relevant. And given, I don't know if there's any way to connect it, but given the climate report that the government just produced, things are hitting home. And the G20 signing the climate change and all that stuff.
What do you think about having, because I really agree with both of you, you don't, especially with a $6 million bottom line here, everybody's gonna want enough information, but perhaps just having some sort of summary page that simplifies it very succinctly, in a paragraph kind of thing for each program, and then has the detail behind it, so those board members that like to just blaze through and skim might be able to do that, and another might be able to dig in and read the whole 3 pages behind each program that may be associated if it piques their interest. What do you think? Is that, I've cliff notes is kind of what I'm thinking here, but I don't know.
Even if this one slide, handout, literally, one-page handout, so as you're going through it, you go, okay, that one, okay, that's that one, okay, that's that one.
Here are the 11 programs with just a summary paragraph.
Because sometimes just watching, you lose track of where you are.
I think it's, the other question that I would think is just like, this is a lot, are we staffed for this?
Good comment.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a lot.
it's definitely a lot. And I'm really glad that you brought up that point. So these specific budget requests do incorporate third-party support. So we have a very lean staff. I mean, we're in the process of stepping up. We have a new member of the DCARB team joining January 2nd, so that's exciting. We're still trying to hire for another position, but it's very, we're lean as an organization, and we'll be leveraging third parties. And so we're in a number of different conversations with who we think are extremely strategic third parties that could provide these sorts of program kind of admin services, in addition to being kind of unique leaders and their own right. And so some of them are municipal utilities, for instance. And so we're in the process of, we've done a lot of groundwork to kind of identify different options, and these budget requests are, much of it is for third-party support, or a lot of it, a significant amount is.
Okay.
We lock the door, so once they come in, we don't ever let them leave.
Can I ask what you've learned about programs and administration from the Air District, and do you have any feedback for me in your working with them? I mean,
Regarding
there's a big overlap in mission between the decarbonization programs that you're proposing and what the Air District is trying to accomplish on climate, right? We have all these Carl Moyer grants and other grants, 130 million, a lot of money beginning to come through thanks to cap and trade and other things. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on what you learned from the Air District, if you think we got a better mousetrap, and how you see us working together over time. Because we have resources, we're going to bring resources to the table in a substantial way, as is already happening, right, to augment what you're doing. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, so we definitely see the Air District as a very strategic partner. I know we keep using that phrase, strategic partner, but the Air District certainly is, and I think was the first one mentioned regarding kind of external resources, but not just that. But as you mentioned, there's massive overlap in mission. And so we've been in a number of conversations with them to identify some of the programs that you're currently launching. I know actually this lunch hour there's a webinar on the financing mechanism that you recently launched. And so one aspect of the relationship is us through mainly account services, making sure that our customers are aware of these sorts of opportunities that they could directly apply to. And so that's certainly kind of one nature of the relationship. Also, we have the heat pump water heater grant, and so certainly we're also looking into what funding we can apply for as an organization, either as SVCE or on behalf of our member agencies or working with our member agencies. And so that's another kind of component of the relationship as well. I would say that there is we have the ability to potentially be a bit more nimble than the Air District. So I think we're looking at kind of shorter term pilots with these external partners is something that we can do just by the nature of our organization that would be harder for something like the Air District to do.
Because?
Just because I don't know if it's...
Bureaucracy of the Air District?
Pardon?
The bureaucracy?
There's certainly a lot of perceived bureaucracy, and there are a lot of anecdotes about some of the requirements for program participation, et cetera. And I don't have any visibility into kind of the source of that, but we're a small organization. We aren't a regulatory body, and so we're just in a different position.
That's true. You're not, and some of our money comes with purse strings. So, I mean that's good feedback, and it also helps me think a little bit about, what advantages we have to play versus theirs. I am going to be the vice chair next year, and the chair the year after that, it seems. So if I can, I will be continuing to ask the question of you. I will be continuing to ask the question of them, because for both agencies, right, pursuing a common mission, I think it's really important that we work to bust that curve.
If I may, I have a horribly bad schedule today. What do we have left to get through? I would really like to be finished up, and I may just have to leave if you're not by 20 after 1.
Amy, you wrapped up, or you want to go through this money stuff at all? It's self-explanatory.
It is, yeah.
It's only if you want to discuss it anymore, or if you have any other feedback.
So how many new staff is that?
So this is, the funding associated with this isn't associated with internal headcount. It would all be...
All of it would be external.
Yeah, but leveraging the headcount that has already been approved in the budget cycle.
Anything else you want to say?
I don't think so. Thank you very much for all of your questions. It was extremely
great.
valuable that we had that.
All right, so strategic plan updates.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll go through that quickly. As soon as the presentation gets,
Thank you, Robert.
start speaking.
Garish, will you give me just 1 second? Bruce would like to make a quick comment.
Wait,
Sure.
Robert.
We have
Public comment.
So to start on a small point, I think the analogy you're looking for distributed energy resources is bars with happy hours when you want people to come in. corkage fees when you want them to bring their own bottle.
Yeah.
And cover charge.
I like it.
Okay, it's a capacity control strategy, like is used in electricity. Let's talk about goal setting. I really believe, and I spent a lot of time looking at this in the Mountain View Sustainability Task Force, that there should be a goal for every year. Because if there isn't an explicit goal, you'll imagine there is by drawing a straight line between the 5-year points. The other thing I have to say is that non-attainment of goals should have some appropriate consequences. And so, to use an analogy, are you planning, if these were my goals, would I be planning my own weight loss, or would I be planning my wife's weight loss? And what kind of consequences can I impose if my wife doesn't lose weight as fast as I'd like her to? This is a very fraught question, but so is what you're trying to do here, because you have very little control over what really happens. There was an idea that hasn't been talked about in a year, I think Rod might have been the one to have brought it up, about, well, what if Silicon Valley Clean Energy was 110% greenhouse gas free, or 150% greenhouse gas free? What if you bought RECs that exceeded what you needed to buy? That might be something that you could actually do, and it might turn out to be pretty affordable, and it's certainly controllable. So don't forget that thought that was floating around a year or so ago.
I forgot that.
So did I.
Let's see, could you go back to slide 11, please?
Sorry.
Okay, so this is a very exciting 2-year period here. But if you charted this back to 2000, you'd see that California as a whole has come down at 0.5% per year over a pretty long period of time. And that to get to 2050, we have to go down at 4.5% per year. And that's the constant decay curve approach. That's a 9x increase in the rate of improvement. That's beyond daunting. And for fairness and equity issues, that's the kind of reduction curve that I have advocated in the past. And if you imagine, here's one way to get here, and here's another way to get here. The first one puts a lot less carbon into the air over the span of decades than this one. They both get to the same endpoint, but they damage the planet differently on the way to get there. But I absolutely believe that a new small organization with limited revenue is more likely to achieve this kind of a curve than the kind that I wish we could achieve. It might be a valuable addition to show how SVCE's revenue would grow over time under these scenarios, because there's going to be a lot more electricity sold in the future than today as you replace gasoline and natural gas with electricity. Let's see, slide. There was a slide where you listed the mobility programs. You had a suggestion of subsidy for selling used EVs to low-income audiences primarily. There's a lot of reason to believe, and I won't belabor the point, I'll just state it, that an incentive program like that essentially puts money in the pocket of the seller, not the buyer. That if you give a $2,000 incentive for somebody who buys a used EV, the seller will just jack up the selling price by $2,000. So I'm strongly opposed to that kind of an incentive for used products. And with that, given the need to move on, I'll stop. But happy to back up anything that I've said or amplify it if you'd like.
Thank you, Bruce.
And
Sorry, Liz, that's a
I'll
question.
make one final comment, since that's like with the plumbers and doing less plumbing, can we ramp up production and installation and maintenance of solar systems? That to me, if we're talking, that's a magnitude beyond. Just a comment.
Good, terrific. Okay, I think now let's let Garish get started. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you,
Sarah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Get to the next slide, please. All right, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because all of you, I think you have the broad outlines already. Strategic plan was approved in June 2017. Earlier in the year, we did some major and minor revisions that were approved by the board. In September 2018, we had a strategic discussion after SB 237.
Right.
And we teed up several issues, and I'm basically updating that presentation for you today, given some changes that have happened since then. Next slide. So in 2018, this is what we summarized. There's going to be a change management required, SVCE 2.0, the change in our focus based on direct access coming in. And in terms of resource allocation, including what you approved for us at the last board meeting, where we got some additional consulting help to help with a change in the competitive landscape. Next slide. So overall over here, when you think about the past, that's SVCE 1.0, to looking at the future of 2.0, we are going to have more competition, PG&E and ESP, lower margin due to that competition. And additionally, since that time, we've had more certainty on some additional costs coming our way. Next slide. And here are some of the major changes. The PCIA decision has increased the PCIA to between 25 and 30% from its current level. This has been incorporated into the budget, and you'll see a little bit of that in a future presentation that Don Bray is making later in this meeting. About a week and a half ago, the PUC issued a proposed decision on resource adequacy, which is very negative to us. We spend about approximately $23 million on resource adequacy each year. About $13 million of those dollars are spent on local resource adequacy. If this goes through, there are scenarios where we may lose as much as $8 million a year. It'll take control away from us and centralize it within the IOU. This is a really bad decision, proposed decision, and through CAP CCA, we are going to push back against that. The PCIA Phase 2 has also been announced, and so we'll be engaging quite a bit on that. So this is in addition to the direct access changes that we had already teed up for you back in September 2018. Next slide. So here, okay. All right, so in terms of our strategic focus, this is the slide that we showed you the last time. I've only changed the top under direct access. I just switched the order. This used to be numbered just the opposite. What we'd like to do is keep our first focus on developing and implementing a strategy to retain our current C&I customers, and then on a case-by-case, being more opportunistic, reach out to those who may already be in DA. And this is in line with what we provided you at the last board meeting in terms of getting some consultants on board to help us with some expertise on this. Other than that, here are all the different areas that we're going to be spending the next 6 months to a year on. On power supply, we are updating our risk management policy. Now, in addition to just the cleanup, which we've talked to the Risk Oversight Committee about, we'll maybe bringing you some additional strategies on our hedging targets, because with the change in the PCIA, we may have to change our hedging target. Also, with our margin being basically cut in half, we would want to revisit our policy decisions that were made about a year and a half ago on what that carbon-free and renewable mix is going to look like. What percentage of it do you want it to be PCC1 and PCC2? Our current path forward is basically PCC1, but given that our margins have shrunk quite a bit, we would want to provide you some alternatives. If you want to stay in the current one, that's fine, but we want to provide you some alternatives. And this also factors into financial liability for our program site also. On our cost of service, we are looking at some margin analysis in order to be able to provide some custom products to customers, like our large CNI customers, as you can see in number 1. We may have to provide them custom rates, and so in order to do that, we'll have a cost of service study done, which our PEA is actually initiated right now. On the legislative and regulatory side, taking the offenses, this is one of the reasons I'm here in Sacramento today, to meet with a few people to look at this. SVCE, we have been working on how we can actually float a bill that covers a number of things, right from fixing the PCIA to just the role that the CCAs would have in the future. PUC interventions, the RA decision has heated up quite a bit, and PCIA phase 2 will continue to intervene there. On the decarb programs, number 10, what you saw today was the modeling and roadmap. That's what you just saw today. And 11 is also part of the decarb rollout that we're looking at. So these are the big picture areas that we're going to be focusing on in the next 6 months to a year. Any questions on this?
Just LACC at the bottom of number 11, is that Los Altos City Council?
So LA,
What does the LACC stand for?
I'm not sure how exactly that can put in there. This is referring to our showcase grants,
Yeah,
an example of which could
Is
be
the
the
Los
Los
Altos
Altos
City
Community
Council.
Center.
That's
Yes,
what I
and we're talking to them
Yeah.
about that,
good, okay.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, yeah.
Next slide, please.
bless you.
I'm not going to go over this other than while we focus on that, there's just a bunch of other regular things that have to be done. So your staff is quite occupied day in, day out, working very hard on a number of these issues. Next. I just updated the slide from September with a few check marks on new tools for new problems. So in September, those weren't checked off. So I've checked those 3 off, and in process are the other 6 that we have here. Next. So in the next, kind of summarizing, DA plan, focus on retention first, attraction second. Update hedging, which includes our risk management policies, including making sure we include the impacts of the new PCIA decision, DA, and custom contract. The board has approved us hiring some new employees. We're actually going to be connected 2 for Monica's group and power supply. Amy has made an offer to 1 person, and we have another person on the wing. So onboarding new employees is going to also take some time, but I think that'll also give us additional capacity to execute a number of these strategies. Number 4, we just talked about. Number 5, I've given you a little bit of an update, and we've also talked to the ad hoc legislative committee just last Friday on these issues. And in spring 2019, we'll formally update the strategic plan to match the new landscape. And I think this is my last slide. I'll be open for any questions.
Any questions?
Just being aware that there'll be some changes on the board, which is always going to be a tough lift.
Yeah, one of the things that a couple of board members have talked to me about, and Courtney, you brought this up quite often, is to have like an orientation workshop and day off. So I'm thinking maybe a Saturday. We may have a 4-hour session on a Saturday to bring in new board members and also existing board members who want to attend end of January or sometime in February.
Yeah, there's just so much complex information, I think you almost have to immerse yourself like that, yeah. Any other questions?
Can you say a little bit more about the RA proposed decision?
Yes.
And
The proposed decision,
procedurally,
Go ahead.
what vehicles do we have to protest this continued takeover by the CPUC?
okay. The RA proposed decision focuses on a central buyer concept. And each investor-owned utility would serve as the central buyer to buy all local RA for the entire region. So PG&E would buy local RA for the entire PG&E service area on behalf of all the CCAs too.
Oh, boy.
The huge problem we have is that I'd say the big picture, two big problems. First is there is no accommodation made for the local RA that we have already purchased. So this is where, in a worst case scenario, we could lose up to $8 million of money we've already spent on local RA. The second big problem is the PUC is using existing structures, including it's called the PRG, which is the Procurement Review Group, where a lot of these transactions that were delegated to PG&E to implement would be kept secret. So there will continue to be a lack of transparency, just like we have expressed concerns at PCIA. We get to pay this PCIA, and by the way, SVCE as a whole, we pay about $100 million a year in PCIA. We don't get to see the details of it. This procurement, the other pieces of the decision say it's multi-year, so it's 3 years. The IOUs would buy 100% in year 1 of local RA, 100% of the identified needs in year 2, and at least 80% of identified needs in year 3. The IOUs could go higher than that if they believe that the prices are too high. They would not have to buy, and they could shift that responsibility back to the California Independent System Operator, who has backstop authority to buy local RA. I think that's the big picture. We are very concerned about reliability. We have actually purchased for multiple years. We actually don't have an issue with the concept of a central buyer. We are fine with the concept of the central buyer, but our proposal as part of CalCCA is have a central buyer that is someone who's not a market player. And so you can create a non-profit agency, or you can have the California Independent System Operator do it, create a new state agency to do it. It's someone who doesn't have
in the race.
basically an axe to grind in this.
Yeah.
The second is give us the ability to buy our own local resource capacity. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're listening.
Okay, good. I heard something on my earphones, just thought I'd run out of juice. Basically, we were suggesting let us buy local resource capacity, and to the extent we are unable to buy the entire amount, the residual amount would be purchased by the central buyer. That was not taken into account. So, Rod, your second question about so that's an overview of the proposal itself. How we could fight this, we are limited to fighting it at the PUC at this point in time. However, there will be, after we make our filings, the PUC will have a final decision. Based on what that final decision is, we get to appeal. We could appeal that decision in state court. And there are also some federal issues that are implicated in the way in which the PUC or the proposed decision has come out. And so we will be teeing that up as part of our comments. And we hope that the PUC will take our concerns into account.
Does CalCCA believe that we might be able to have a conversation with our legislators about more clearly delineating who has who has the ability to purchase RA in ways we've suggested.
Yeah, I think that, so there are two pathways, right? We have the very official pathway of how we respond to this, which we are very limited in how we can do that.
Yeah.
And there's a limit of the number of pages, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's completely up to CalCC and us. I think having ex parte meetings, CalCC is starting to do, and also reaching out to our legislators to help communicate some of our concerns are both on the table. We don't have an implementation like we do right now. We're actually working on meeting some deadlines on the content of the response right now. So as soon as that gets done, we'll work on these other two.
I understand why we have to go through the process and the procedure with the CPUC, but I would observe that, and we should, but I would observe that we've gotten rolled every time the last 2 years. And, you know, this seems to really go against the spirit of enabling legislation that set up community choice energy in this state. We are now being put under the thumb of our competitor, and with risk that RA we've procured would be would lose a lot of value, perhaps all of it. I don't understand why it wouldn't be time to try to say we're not getting a fair shake at the CPUC, and we simply have to try some other approaches.
Yeah, if I may suggest,
and maybe this isn't the issue. Maybe this isn't the only issue to fight on, or the best issue to fight on. But my God,
yeah,
this is pretty clearly over
more on the ad hoc legislative committee meeting.
Yes.
To talk about tactics.
Yes.
As the executive committee is aware, the board approved us hiring a lobbyist, and we had our first meeting with the lobbyist last Friday, and Rod is the chair of the ad hoc committee. So we will be talking about that. I would suggest we talk about it there.
And we will. I wanted to make some other board members aware of what was going on. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure. Additionally, I also would like to float an idea to the executive committee. Given that we would want to offer custom contracts for retaining some of our C&I customers, I think there's some strategy on pricing and marketing that we want to go through that I don't think is appropriate at this stage to bring up at a board meeting. That Brown Act meeting. I think these are more confidential. We have a couple of ideas that we're thinking about. One is to have the Risk Oversight Committee help us with this. The second idea is creating an ad hoc rate strategy or competitive strategy group. And if we go down that route, I would suggest that we have a very technical group involved there. Maybe it's the Risk Oversight Committee itself, those members who would serve on the ad hoc committee. Haven't thought that through overall, but at a minimum, we bring some of these pricing and strategic issues to the Risk Oversight Committee.
I'm fine with that idea. I think it's appropriate. Anything that negotiations and rates, we definitely don't want it public at a board meeting, at least not initially, right?
Yep.
You're right on the strategy, right? There's a time when all of our, we intend to operate with transparency, and we do. We're interested in being as transparent as we can, but we also have to protect our strategy and game plan, so.
Right.
Well, I think
So I think, sorry.
You're just gonna say you clearly lay that out as part of the strategic discussion or programs today in the previous two reports. I mean, it's clear that's a mission of the organization. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good. So we'll develop these strategies in consultation with the ROC, and once we are done with it, of course, we'll be discussing it with the entire board of public. Thank you.
Does the risk oversight committee meet again?
On Monday, next Monday.
Next Monday, okay, good. Okay, great. Thank you, Garish.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from anyone about this agenda item? No, then we'll move on to increase approval limit for the CEO.
We'll keep this to under a minute. So Garish laid out the landscape of where we're at right now and all the challenges we're facing. So we're looking for a recommendation here today, just to give us another tool in the toolbox, if you will, to be able to increase the flexibility of this agency and react quickly when needed. Slide. So our recommendation would then be to come to the board next week with an amendment to financial policy number 6, essentially increasing the CEO approval authority from currently at $25,000 to $100,000, and then anything over $100,000 we would take to the board for approval. And how we came up with the $100,000 number, if we go to the next slide. We just benchmarked other large CCAs or member agencies, the 3 largest, meaning from energy usage from our viewpoint, as well as other agencies out there, and $100,000 recommendation that we have today is certainly within the range of our other CCAs or member agencies. So with that, we want to bring this through a staff report on a consent item next week. Does the executive committee have any issues with us bringing this to the board next week?
I have no issue with it, but I do have a couple quick questions.
Please.
Number one, does that $100,000 limit is within one calendar budget year, or could it bind us to a contract that had, a 6-month renewal or cycle that was actually a $200,000 decision being made? And the second question is, could we limit, just as part of our larger checks and balances conversation, could we limit it to a one-time contract and certainly not to reflect salary increases or anything internally that could be misappropriated somehow?
Sure. Yeah, our intent would be to keep it on a 1-year budget cycle.
Okay.
If we went to 2 or 3 years, we'd handle it like we did the last budget meeting, or the board meeting. Where we
Or
did that
more
resolution.
than once within a year?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good.
We'll cover that.
And then something that clarifies that he can't grant a $100,000 bonus to somebody except for me, of course.
He's buying us all a car.
Yeah.
We'll cover that for you.
To clarify that, to just make sure we've got checks and balances in place. I think it's appropriate. The agency's matured, the budgets are bigger, the income is bigger, revenues are bigger, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, everything's bigger.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? No. All right, and then any other staff remarks or anything? We're done. Adjourned.